There are survival stories that defy biological possibility, that challenge everything scientists understand about cold tolerance, starvation physiology, and wound healing. Stories where an animal should have died 10 different ways, but somehow lived anyway. In February 2019, Montana wildlife biologist Dr. Marcus Webb was conducting post-winter den surveys in the Cabinet Mountains wilderness when he found something that shouldn't exist. Tracks in the snow leading to an active grizzly den, weeks before bears normally emerged from hibernation, and the tracks showed a severe limp suggesting catastrophic injury. When Marcus approached the den cautiously and looked inside, he found a female grizzly bear that had survived Montana's coldest winter on record with a compound fracture in her front leg, a wound that should have killed her through infection, through inability to hunt before hibernation, through blood loss, through a dozen other fatal complications. But she was alive, barely, emaciated to the point where her ribs showed through her fur, but alive and conscious. The question that haunted Marcus as he called for emergency veterinary support wasn't just how this bear had survived the impossible, but why. Why had she fought so hard to stay alive when nature offered easier deaths? The answer, discovered over the following weeks of treatment and monitoring, would reveal a survival story that redefined understanding of maternal instinct, pain tolerance, and the will to live when living should be impossible. Dr. Marcus Webb had studied grizzly bears for 22 years, specializing in denning behavior and hibernation physiology. Every spring, he conducted surveys to assess bear populations, check den sites, and monitor post-hibernation emergence patterns. The winter of 2018 to 2019 had been Montana's coldest in 50 years. Temperatures dropping to -40 degrees, record snowfall, conditions that pushed wildlife to survival limits. When Marcus found the tracks in late February, a full month before grizzlies typically emerged, his first thought was that the bear was sick, possibly dying, coming out early due to distress. But the tracks told a more complex story. They showed a massive limp, the left front paw barely touching snow, drag marks suggesting the bear was pulling herself forward using 3 functional limbs. "This bear is critically injured," Marcus radioed to his research partner, Dr. Sarah Kim. "Based on track pattern, I'd estimate a severe front leg injury, possibly fracture, possibly old trap injury. She's mobile but barely." He followed the tracks to a den entrance, a natural cavity beneath a massive fallen spruce, partially buried in snowdrift. Standard protocol said, wait for backup before approaching dens, but Marcus could hear sounds from inside. Not aggression, but labored breathing, signs of distress. "I'm going to visual confirm," Marcus told Sarah. "If this bear is dying, we need to know for humane response assessment." He approached slowly, announcing his presence with voice calls, and shined his light into the den entrance. What he saw stopped him cold. A female grizzly, approximately 8 years old and maybe 280 pounds, severely underweight for her size, lay in the den in lateral recumbency. Her left front leg was grotesquely swollen, bent at an unnatural angle midway down the radius, the fur matted with old blood and tissue. A compound fracture, weeks or months old, that had somehow not killed her yet. But she was conscious, watching him, and her eyes showed something Marcus had seen in dying animals before, desperate determination to survive. Dr. Sarah Kim arrived with emergency veterinary equipment within 2 hours. When she saw the bear's condition, her assessment was immediate and grim. "That fracture is at least 3 months old," Sarah said, examining the leg through binoculars from safe distance. "Compound fracture of the radius, severe infection visible, bone exposure. Marcus, this bear should be dead. The infection alone should have gone septic and killed her. The fact that she survived hibernation in this condition is medically impossible." They called in additional support: Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, a specialized large predator veterinary team, and DART equipment for safe sedation. The plan was straightforward: sedate the bear, assess her condition, and make the difficult decision about whether treatment was possible or if humane euthanasia was the kindest option. When the sedative took effect and they could approach safely, the full horror of her condition became clear. The bear weighed only 285 pounds, at least 150 pounds underweight for a female her size and age. She had virtually no body fat remaining, her ribs and hip bones visible through her fur. The leg fracture was catastrophic, a complete break with bone fragments visible through infected tissue, the paw below the break cold and showing poor circulation. This happened during fall, before hibernation, Sarah assessed, examining the wound carefully. "Based on healing patterns and infection progression, I'd estimate October or early November. She went into hibernation with this injury, survived the entire winter without moving, without the ability to hunt beforehand to build fat reserves, and somehow her body didn't shut down completely." Marcus photographed everything for documentation. "How is she alive?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. Her body should have prioritized healing the fracture during hibernation, but without adequate fat stores, she should have starved. The infection should have killed her. Hypothermia should have killed her. Marcus, this bear survived at least 5 different fatal conditions simultaneously. Something kept her fighting to stay alive. The veterinary team faced an agonizing decision. The bear, whom they named Aurora, had virtually 0 chance of survival in the wild with her injury. The leg was too damaged to heal naturally, amputation wasn't viable for wild release, and her emaciated condition meant months of recovery even under ideal care. "Standard protocol says euthanasia," said Dr. James Rodriguez, the state wildlife veterinarian. "She can't hunt, can't defend territory, can't survive wild. This is a suffering animal with no quality of life prognosis." But Sarah hesitated. "She survived the impossible winter already. She's conscious, alert, responsive. James, she's fighting. Doesn't she deserve a chance?" They compromised. Transport Aurora to the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, stabilize her condition, surgically address the leg, and assess survival prognosis after 1 month. If she showed no improvement or continued suffering, euthanasia would be the humane choice. The transport itself was delicate. Aurora was so weak that moving her risked cardiac arrest. They kept her sedated, provided IV fluids and antibiotics, and monitored constantly during the 3-hour transport to the facility. Surgery revealed the fracture's severity. The radius was shattered, requiring surgical pins and external fixation. The infection was deep, but responded to aggressive antibiotic treatment. Her starvation was life-threatening. They had to feed her carefully, slowly rebuilding her digestive system's function after months of hibernation with no fat reserves. "She's not giving up," Sarah told Marcus during a week 2 check-in. Most bears in her condition would be lethargic, unresponsive. Aurora fights every medical procedure, protests every examination, tries to stand even though her leg can't support weight. It's like she has something to live for, some reason she refuses to quit. What could motivate that level of survival drive? Marcus wondered. They would discover the answer in the most unexpected way possible, when spring fully arrived, and Aurora's body revealed a secret she'd been carrying through the entire impossible winter. In late March, 6 weeks into Aurora's recovery, veterinary assistant Chen noticed something during a routine examination. Aurora's mammary glands were enlarged and producing milk. "Dr. Kim, you need to see this," Chen called urgently. Sarah examined Aurora carefully, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. "She's lactating." "Marcus, Aurora is producing milk. She gave birth during hibernation." The revelation changed everything. Female grizzlies give birth during hibernation in January or February, producing tiny cubs while semi-conscious. Aurora had been pregnant when she suffered the compound fracture in October. She'd entered hibernation critically injured, starving, infected, and somehow her body had sustained not just her own life, but pregnancy and birth. "Where are the cubs?" Marcus asked immediately. They returned to Aurora's den site with ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation equipment. What they found at the back of the den chamber destroyed everyone present. 2 tiny grizzly cub bodies, approximately 8 weeks old, curled together in death. "They died from starvation," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she examined the cubs. "Aurora couldn't produce enough milk. She was so emaciated that her body couldn't sustain lactation. These babies nursed until they simply ran out of strength." The cubs had died perhaps 2 weeks before Marcus discovered Aurora, which meant Aurora had been lying in that den with her dead babies, her shattered leg, her starving body, knowing they were gone but unable to leave them. That's why she stayed alive, Marcus realized, tears streaming down his face. She stayed alive trying to feed them. When they died, she stayed alive because she couldn't abandon them. She was waiting in that den to die with her cubs rather than leave their bodies alone. Aurora hadn't survived the impossible winter through some biological miracle. She'd survived through maternal love that refused to quit, even when quitting would have been merciful. The discovery devastated the entire rehabilitation team. Aurora had endured catastrophic injury, starvation, infection, and the coldest winter on record, not to save herself, but desperately trying to keep her cubs alive against impossible odds. When they died, she remained with their bodies, unable to hunt or leave the den with her shattered leg. "She was found 3 weeks after we estimate the cubs died," Sarah explained to the team. "She could have died peacefully in that den with them, but her body kept fighting. Some part of her wasn't ready to give up." Aurora's recovery took on new meaning. The veterinary team worked with fierce determination, as if honoring her impossible survival required them to save her now. The leg healed slowly, the pins held, infection cleared, and Aurora began bearing weight on the limb after 8 weeks. But her emotional state was devastating. Aurora showed signs of profound depression, refusing food, lying motionless for hours, making soft vocalizations that sounded like maternal calls to absent cubs. She'd survived physically, but emotionally, she was dying. "She's grieving," Marcus observed during a consultation. "She lost her cubs, her territory, her wildlife. What does she have to live for now?" The answer came unexpectedly. The rehabilitation center received 3 orphaned grizzly cubs, 2 months old, rescued after their mother was killed by a vehicle. Standard protocol was to hand-rear them separately, but Sarah proposed something unprecedented. "What if we introduce them to Aurora? She's lactating, she's maternal, she needs purpose. These cubs need a mother. It's not protocol, but nothing about Aurora's survival has been normal." The introduction was carefully supervised. When the 3 cubs were placed in Aurora's recovery enclosure, she approached slowly, cautiously, and then began sniffing them intensely, making soft maternal sounds. The cubs, desperate for a mother, immediately began trying to nurse. Aurora laid down and let them. The transformation in Aurora was immediate and profound. Within days of accepting the orphaned cubs, she began eating voraciously, gaining weight, showing animated behavior. She groomed the cubs constantly, protected them fiercely, nursed them despite her own depleted condition. The cubs thrived under her care, bonding completely with their adoptive mother. "She has a reason to live again," Sarah documented. "Aurora survived the impossible because she's a mother. Losing her biological cubs nearly killed her emotionally. But these orphans gave her purpose back. She's raising them like they're her own." Over the following months, Aurora's leg healed to functional capacity. She would always have a visible limp, but she could walk, climb, and demonstrate normal bear behaviors. The 3 cubs grew strong and healthy under her devoted care, learning survival skills from a mother who'd proven she'd endure anything for her offspring. By October, 1 year after Aurora's original injury, all 4 bears were assessed as ready for release consideration. Aurora was healthy weight, fully recovered, demonstrating appropriate wild behaviors. The cubs were thriving, showing species-typical development. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks approved their release as a family unit into protected wilderness with excellent habitat and no vehicle access, the same threat that had killed the cubs' biological mother. The release occurred on a clear autumn morning. When the transport crates opened, Aurora emerged first, immediately checking that all 3 cubs were present. She'd lost her first litter to starvation caused by her injury. These 3 cubs represented her second chance, and she wasn't taking any risks. She led them into the forest carefully, pausing frequently to ensure they followed. Before disappearing into the trees, she stopped and looked back toward the assembled rescue team, particularly Marcus, who'd found her dying in that den. It looked like acknowledgement, like "thank you for letting me be a mother again." Aurora was monitored via GPS collar for 3 years post-release. She successfully raised all 3 adopted cubs to independence, a 100% survival rate that exceeded wild averages. Her limp remained visible in trail camera footage, but it never prevented her from fishing, foraging, or defending territory. She proved that survival wasn't about being perfect. It was about refusing to quit. 2 years after release, Aurora was observed with 2 new biological cubs of her own. She'd mated successfully and given birth to a healthy litter, finally achieving what her injured body had tried so desperately to accomplish during that impossible winter. Those cubs thrived, were raised to independence, and eventually produced offspring of their own. Dr. Marcus Webb never stopped thinking about that moment when he'd looked into the den and seen Aurora lying with her shattered leg, starving beside her dead cubs, but still alive because some part of her refused to surrender. People ask how she survived, Marcus said during his final research presentation before retirement. The medical answer is, she shouldn't have. Compound fracture, severe infection, extreme starvation, record cold, lactation failure. Any one of those should have killed her. All of them together made survival statistically impossible. But Aurora didn't survive because of biology or luck. She survived because she was a mother trying to keep her babies alive, and when they died, she survived because she couldn't abandon them. That kind of love doesn't follow biological rules. It writes its own. The den where Aurora nearly died was marked by researchers, but never publicized. It remains a quiet place in the Montana wilderness where an impossible survival occurred, where a mother bear chose to starve slowly beside her dead cubs rather than abandon them, where maternal love proved stronger than infection, cold, starvation, and pain, where the answer to how did she survive was simpler and more profound than any scientific explanation. She survived because mothers don't quit, even when dying would be easier, even when hope is gone, even when the coldest winter tries to break them. Some survival stories aren't about strength or luck. They're about love refusing to die. If this story broke your heart, if it proved that maternal devotion transcends species and defies biological possibility, if it showed you that the strongest force in nature isn't survival instinct, but a mother's refusal to abandon her children even in death, leave a comment about impossible odds you've seen overcome through love. And if you believe that every mother, human or animal, deserves someone willing to give her a second chance, hit subscribe. Because Aurora lay dying beside her cubs in the coldest winter on record, and when rescuers gave her orphans who needed a mother, she chose to live again. Thank you for witnessing her impossible survival.